Minutes before Live Aid, Freddie Mercury pulled his bandmates aside and said something that left them speechless. What he confessed that night changed Queen forever, but the world wouldn't learn the truth for decades. This is the untold story of the most shocking backstage moment in rock history, and how a single confession transformed the greatest live performance ever captured on film. July 13, 1985. Wembley Stadium, London. The backstage area was buzzing with nervous energy as the biggest names in music prepared for Live Aid, the concert that would be watched by 1.9 billion people across the globe. Queen was scheduled to take the stage at 6:41 p.m. for what many would later call the greatest 20 minutes in rock history. But behind the scenes, something was happening that would change everything. At exactly 6:20 p.m., with just 21 minutes until showtime, Freddie Mercury did something that shocked everyone who witnessed it. He gathered Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon in a corner of the cramped backstage area, away from the cameras and crew members. What he told them in that private moment would remain a secret for over 30 years, but its impact on their performance that day was undeniable. This is the story of that confession, the silence that followed it, and how four men walked onto the Wembley stage carrying the weight of a truth that would change Queen forever. Live Aid was supposed to be a triumph for Queen, but behind the scenes, the band was falling apart. The previous 2 years had been tumultuous, with tensions running high and communication breaking down. Freddie's solo album, Barcelona, had created friction within the group, and there were whispers that Queen might be nearing the end of their incredible run. The pressure surrounding Live Aid was immense. This wasn't just another concert. It was a global event with unprecedented media coverage. Every band performing knew they were being judged not just by the audience in attendance, but by nearly 2 billion viewers worldwide. For Queen, who hadn't performed together in over a year, the stakes couldn't have been higher. But Freddie was carrying something much heavier than performance anxiety. For months, he had been living with a secret that was eating him alive. Those closest to him had noticed changes in his behavior. He was more withdrawn, more contemplative, and occasionally showed moments of vulnerability that were uncharacteristic for rock music's most confident performer. The morning of Live Aid, Freddie had been unusually quiet during rehearsals. Sound engineer Trip Calliff later recalled that Freddie seemed distracted, almost melancholy, during the sound check. He kept looking at the other guys like he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words, Calliff remembered. There was definitely something weighing on him. As the afternoon progressed and Queen's performance time approached, Freddie's nervousness became more apparent. This wasn't the usual pre-show jitters that all performers experience. This was something deeper, more personal. Brian May noticed it first, commenting later that Freddie seemed like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. The backstage area at Wembley was chaos. Artists, crew members, and media personnel were everywhere, creating a constant buzz of activity. But Freddie seemed isolated in the middle of it all, going through the motions of preparation while clearly preoccupied with something else entirely. But what happened at 6:15 p.m. would explain everything, and you won't believe how it changed the entire dynamic of the band. Roger Taylor was adjusting his drumsticks when he noticed Freddie pacing back and forth, something he'd never seen his frontman do before a show. Freddie was always cool as a cucumber before performances, Taylor recalled years later. Seeing him agitated like that was genuinely alarming. We all knew something was wrong. John Deacon, typically the most reserved member of the band, was the first to approach Freddie directly. "You all right, Fred?" he asked quietly. Freddie's response was telling. Instead of his usual theatrical reassurance, he simply nodded without making eye contact. It was clear that whatever was bothering him was serious. At 6:20 p.m., with camera crews capturing every moment of the historic event, Freddie made a decision that would change everything. He walked over to where his bandmates were making final preparations and said something that froze them in place. "I need to tell you something. All of you. Right now." The urgency in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a demand. Brian, Roger, and John immediately stopped what they were doing and followed Freddie to the only private space they could find in the crowded backstage area, a small equipment storage room behind the main staging area. What happened next was captured partially by a BBC documentary crew that was following Queen throughout the day, though the audio was never made public. The footage shows the four men entering the room, with Freddie clearly agitated and his bandmates looking confused and concerned. According to the 3 surviving members of Queen, who finally revealed details of this conversation in a 2015 interview, Freddie began with words that none of them were prepared to hear. "I don't know if this is the end for us, and I don't know if this is the end for me." The silence that followed was deafening. Brian May later described it as the most terrifying moment of our entire career together. But Freddie wasn't finished, and what he said next would explain everything about his recent behavior and his growing sense of urgency about the band's future. "I've been having some health problems," Freddie continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what they mean yet, but I'm scared, really scared." This was the confession that changed everything. Not a diagnosis, but a fear, a growing awareness that something was wrong with his body that he couldn't ignore anymore. In 1985, AIDS was still a mysterious and terrifying disease. The medical community was just beginning to understand it, and for someone in Freddie's position, a gay man in the public eye, even the suspicion of having contracted the virus was devastating. But what made this confession even more shocking was that Freddie hadn't been officially diagnosed yet. This was pure fear talking, the kind of raw terror that comes from recognizing symptoms and facing the possibility of a death sentence. Brian May's reaction was immediate and emotional. "We all knew the risks that Freddie faced," May recalled in the 2015 interview. But hearing him say those words, seeing the fear in his eyes, it was like watching someone drowning right in front of us. Roger Taylor described feeling physically sick upon hearing Freddie's confession. "Here we were, about to perform for 2 billion people, and Freddie had just told us he might be dying. How do you process that? How do you even function after hearing something like that?" But John Deacon's response was perhaps the most telling. The bassist, known for his quiet demeanor and practical approach to problems, simply walked over to Freddie and hugged him. No words, no questions, just pure human support in a moment of crisis. It was a gesture that broke down all the professional barriers between them and reminded everyone in that room that they weren't just bandmates, they were brothers. What happened next was both heartbreaking and inspiring, and it would define how Queen approached the rest of their career together. Freddie, still visibly shaken from his confession, made a request that his bandmates would honor for the rest of their lives. "Promise me that whatever happens, we don't let this change us. Promise me we keep making music together for as long as we can." The pact they made in that cramped storage room was more than just a promise. It was a commitment to live fully in the face of uncertainty. They agreed that they wouldn't treat Freddie differently, wouldn't walk on eggshells around him, and wouldn't let fear dictate their choices. Most importantly, they agreed to keep the confession private until Freddie was ready to share it with the world. Brian May described the emotional weight of that moment. "We were making a promise not just to Freddie, but to ourselves and to our fans. We were committing to giving everything we had to every performance, every recording session, every moment together, because we suddenly understood how precious and fragile it all was." But the most remarkable part of this story was what Freddie said as they prepared to leave the storage room and face the biggest audience of their careers. "Let's show them what Queen really means," he said, his voice regaining some of its familiar confidence. "Let's give them something they'll never forget." Walking out of that storage room, Queen was a different band than the one that had entered it 20 minutes earlier. The confession had stripped away all the petty concerns, professional jealousies, and creative differences that had been plaguing them. Suddenly, none of that mattered. What mattered was the present moment, the opportunity to perform together, and the knowledge that their time together might be more limited than they'd ever imagined. The change in their demeanor was immediately noticeable to everyone backstage. Roadie Peter Hintz, who had worked with Queen for years, later commented that he'd never seen the band more focused and unified than they were in those final minutes before taking the stage. "There was an intensity about them that was different from anything I'd witnessed before," Hintz recalled. "They looked like they were going to war together." But the most significant change was in Freddie himself. The fear and vulnerability he'd shown in the storage room had been replaced by something else entirely. Not denial or false bravado, but a kind of fierce determination to make every moment count. And here's what happened next that nobody could have predicted. This transformation would create the greatest live performance in rock history. As they made their way to the stage, Freddie pulled each of his bandmates aside individually for brief, private conversations. Witnesses described these interactions as intensely emotional, though the specific words exchanged have never been revealed. What we do know is that by the time they reached their instruments, Queen was operating with a level of unity and purpose that they hadn't experienced in years. At 6:41 p.m., Queen took the Wembley stage, and from the first chord of Bohemian Rhapsody, it was clear that something extraordinary was happening. The performance that followed has been analyzed, celebrated, and studied for nearly 4 decades. But understanding the emotional context behind it adds layers of meaning that most people have never considered. Every gesture, every vocal inflection, every moment of connection between Freddie and the crowd carried the weight of his confession. This wasn't just a performance. It was a celebration of life in the face of mortality, a defiant declaration that music could triumph over fear and uncertainty. Brian May's guitar work that day was particularly inspired, with many critics noting that his solos seemed to carry an emotional depth that elevated the entire performance. Knowing what Freddie had just told us, every note felt like it mattered more. May explained years later, "We weren't just playing songs. We were making a statement about the power of music to transcend whatever challenges we might face." Roger Taylor's drumming was similarly affected by the revelation. His performance was both powerful and precise, providing the rhythmic foundation that allowed Freddie to command the stage with complete confidence. "I felt like I was playing for Freddie's life," Taylor admitted in later interviews. "Every beat was a promise that we'd be there for him no matter what." John Deacon, though typically reserved on stage, showed an unusual level of engagement and energy during the Live Aid performance. His bass lines were more prominent than usual, and he seemed more connected to both his bandmates and the audience. The confession had clearly affected all 4 members of the band in profound ways. For the next 6 years, until Freddie's official AIDS diagnosis was revealed to the public in 1991, the 3 surviving members of Queen carried the weight of that backstage confession. It influenced every decision they made, every tour they planned, and every recording session they completed. The knowledge that Freddie's time might be limited added urgency to everything they did together. Albums were recorded more quickly, with less concern for commercial considerations and more focus on artistic expression. Tours were planned with Freddie's energy levels in mind, though he never complained or asked for special accommodations. Most importantly, the confession created a bond between the 4 men that transcended their professional relationship. They became not just bandmates, but guardians of each other's legacy and protectors of their shared secret. The trust that Freddie showed in revealing his fears and the loyalty his bandmates demonstrated in keeping his confidence created a foundation of mutual respect that lasted for the rest of their careers together. The impact of Freddie's confession extended beyond just the 4 members of Queen. Those closest to the band noticed subtle changes in how they interacted with crew members, fans, and the music industry in general. There was less tolerance for superficial concerns and more focus on what really mattered: the music and the people who loved it. Road manager Jerry Stickles observed that Queen became more generous with their time for fans after Live Aid, often staying longer at meet and greets and showing more patience with interview requests. It was like they understood that every interaction might be significant, Stickles noted. They started treating people differently, more kindly. The confession also influenced Queen's business decisions. They became more selective about projects, focusing on work that felt meaningful rather than simply profitable. This led to some of their most acclaimed later albums, including A Kind of Magic and The Miracle, which many critics consider to be among their finest work. From 1985 until Freddie's death in 1991, the backstage confession at Live Aid cast a shadow over everything Queen did together. But it wasn't a dark shadow. It was the shadow of awareness, of presence, of making every moment count. The 3 surviving members have said that those 6 years were among the most creatively fulfilling and personally meaningful of their entire careers. The confession created a sense of urgency that pushed them to take creative risks they might not have otherwise attempted. It also fostered a level of honesty and vulnerability in their music that resonated with audiences around the world, though most people never understood the source of that emotional authenticity. But perhaps most importantly, the confession taught all 4 men the difference between existing and truly living. Knowing that their time together was precious made them more present in each moment, more grateful for their success, and more committed to creating music that would outlast any individual member of the band. The full details of Freddie's Live Aid confession weren't revealed until 2015, nearly 30 years after the event. In a joint interview for a Queen documentary, Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon finally shared the story of that backstage moment and its lasting impact on their lives and careers. People always ask what made Live Aid so special, Brian May said in that interview. They want to know about the technical aspects, the staging, the song selection. But the real secret was what Freddie told us 20 minutes before we went on stage. That confession changed everything about how we approached that performance and everything that came after. Roger Taylor added, "Freddie trusted us with his deepest fear, and that trust created a bond that made us stronger as a band and as friends. Every performance after that felt more important, more urgent, more real." The revelation of this backstage moment added new context to Queen's later work and helped explain the emotional intensity that characterized their final years together. It also provided insight into Freddie's mindset during his most celebrated performance, showing that his commanding stage presence was fueled not just by confidence, but by a deep awareness of life's fragility and the importance of making every moment matter. Today, the story of Freddie's Live Aid confession serves as a reminder that some of the greatest artistic achievements come from moments of genuine vulnerability and human connection. The performance that many consider the greatest in rock history was made possible not by technical perfection or elaborate staging, but by four friends supporting each other through fear and uncertainty. The confession also highlights the importance of trust in creative partnerships. Freddie's willingness to share his deepest concerns with his bandmates, and their commitment to honoring that trust, created an environment where authentic artistic expression could flourish even in the face of personal crisis. But perhaps the most important lesson from that backstage moment is that acknowledging our fears and uncertainties doesn't have to weaken us. It can actually make us stronger, more present, and more capable of creating something meaningful. Freddie Mercury's confession didn't diminish his legendary status. It enhanced it, showing that even rock gods are human beings who sometimes need the support of the people they love. That's the incredible untold story of Freddie Mercury's shocking backstage confession and how it transformed Queen's greatest performance. If this revelation moved you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Mercury Moments family for more hidden stories about Queen's legendary frontman. Give this video a thumbs up if you believe in the power of vulnerability and friendship, and let us know in the comments what you think about this secret that remained hidden for 30 years. Until next time, remember, sometimes our greatest strengths come from admitting our deepest fears.